For 50 years, the most recognizable clue in the Oakland County Child Killer case has been a blue AMC Gremlin. It appeared on wanted posters beside a composite sketch. Police stopped drivers who owned one. Decades later, investigators even dug up the remains of a buried gremlin in a Michigan field, yet the car may never have carried a victim at all. The child supposedly seen beside it, 11-year-old Timothy King, may have disappeared while the gremlin remained parked exactly where the witness had seen it. That possibility does more than weaken an old lead. It changes the shape of one of America's most troubling unsolved investigations. Between February 1976 and March 1977, 4 children vanished from communities north of Detroit. Mark Stebbins was 12, Jill Robinson was 12, Kristine Mihelich was 10, Timothy King was 11. Each was kept alive for days. They were fed. Their bodies and clothing appeared to have been cleaned. The 2 boys were sexually assaulted with an object. 3 children were suffocated. Jill was killed with a 12-gauge shotgun. Their bodies were left beside roads, near businesses, or within sight of homes, where discovery was almost inevitable. A massive TOTS task force collected thousands of tips, issued a suspect composite, examined vehicles, questioned offenders, and followed the case into child exploitation networks that stretched from Detroit's Cass Corridor to an island in Lake Michigan. Physical evidence later pointed toward more than one circle of people. A hair on Kristine's clothing was consistent with the maternal line of a teenage acquaintance of one major person of interest. A different hair profile linked the bodies of Mark and Timothy to a convicted child molester's car, but not to the molester himself. Blood-stained ligatures found in another man's room later disappeared from evidence. An anonymous writer promised photographs proving that his roommate was the killer, then failed to appear at the arranged meeting. The case contains enough near answers to make almost any one of them feel decisive when viewed alone. Together, they create a harder question. Was one careful offender moving through Oakland County, or did the investigation brush against a connected group of men who abused children, shared locations, lent cars, and knew more than any one witness ever admitted? And while police attention settled on a small blue hatchback, did a darker, larger Pontiac move quietly through the original reports? The first known victim disappeared before there was a serial case, before a special task force, and before parents across suburban Detroit began watching every unfamiliar car. On Sunday, February 15, 1976, 12-year-old Mark Douglas Stebbins spent part of the afternoon at an American Legion Hall in Ferndale. At about 1:30, he telephoned his mother and told her he was leaving for home. It was a familiar trip. He never arrived. Mark was a 7th grade student at Lincoln Junior High School. He was quiet, small for his age, and described as a good student. His mother reported him missing that night. At first, police had no pattern to work with. There was one missing boy, one route, and a winter afternoon that had already ended before anyone understood that the clock mattered. 4 days later, shortly before noon, a businessman crossed a parking area near the New Orleans Mall at 10 Mile and Greenfield in Southfield. In the distance, he saw what looked like a mannequin in a blue jacket and jeans. When he came closer, he realized it was Mark. One witness later told police that he had walked his dog through that part of the parking lot around 9:30 that morning. The dog had been on a long leash, and the witness believed it would have noticed the body. If that recollection was correct, Mark had been placed there during a window of a little more than 2 hours, in daylight, near offices and stores. Whoever brought him did not choose a remote woodland. The offender used an ordinary commercial space and apparently expected to enter, unload a child, and leave without being stopped. The autopsy found that Mark had died from smothering or suffocation. Marks on his wrists, ankles, and neck indicated restraint, and there were 2 lacerations at the rear of his head. He had been sexually assaulted with an object. His body and clothing appeared clean, suggesting that someone had washed him or required him to wash during captivity. There was another loss that would matter years later. According to the prosecutor at the time, the body was washed during the autopsy process, destroying any fingerprints that might have survived on the skin. That was not necessarily unusual by the standards and habits of the period, but it became a permanent limit. In 1976, investigators could not foresee modern DNA testing. A hair without a root, a tiny skin cell, or a faint biological trace did not carry the meaning it might carry today. Evidence was collected for the science that existed, not for the science that would arrive decades later. Once something was washed away, there was no future laboratory capable of bringing it back. Mark's murder drew attention, but it did not immediately produce the public understanding of a serial offender. There was no confirmed witness to his abduction, and no known demand for money. Police had a child held for several days, bound, assaulted, killed, and then placed in a public location. That sequence should have required a private space and time. It also suggested an offender who could behave with control for days, then take a serious risk during disposal. For 10 months, no second confirmed victim appeared. The gap made it easier to treat Mark's death as an isolated crime, even though the person responsible had revealed a method that would later return. On December 22, 1976, 12-year-old Jill Robinson argued with her mother in Royal Oak. The dispute began over helping with dinner, specifically making biscuits. In anger, her mother told her to leave until she was ready to act as part of the family. Jill went to her room, packed clothing and a blanket into a denim bag, dressed for the cold, and rode away on her bicycle. It was the kind of family argument that ordinarily ends with a child returning home, a parent softening, and both sides regretting words spoken too quickly. Instead, it became the last private moment Jill's mother would replay for the rest of her life. A family friend saw Jill at a hobby shop on Woodward Avenue, only a few blocks from home. Witnesses later reported seeing her at a donut shop on Maple Road early the next morning. Her bicycle was found near the hobby store. Those sightings suggested that Jill may have remained in the area for hours after leaving home. They also complicated the question of when she entered the control of her killer. She had run away voluntarily, which gave a stranger an opening. A child outdoors in winter, carrying a bag, possibly tired, possibly angry, and perhaps more willing than usual to accept a ride or help. Jill's father reported her missing late that night. 4 days after she left home, on the morning of December 26, her body was found beside Interstate 75 north of Big Beaver Road in Troy. She was fully clothed and had not been bound when she was left there. There were no signs that she had been sexually assaulted. She had been shot at close range with a 12-gauge shotgun. The weapon made Jill's death look different from Mark's. The condition of her body made it look connected. Investigators concluded that she had been fed and cared for during at least part of the time she was missing. She appeared clean. Her clothing was orderly. The offender had again held a child, maintained control, and then placed the body in a visible area beside a major route. Jill's body was found within view of public buildings and heavy traffic. The location did not simply dispose of evidence. It announced that she had been returned. That does not prove the killer wanted publicity, and it does not tell us whether he watched the discovery. It does show that concealment was not the final goal. A person trying only to avoid detection had many more isolated places available in wintertime Michigan. 1 week after Jill's body was found, another child vanished. On January 2, 1977, 10-year-old Kristine Mihelich was at a bowling alley in Berkeley where her mother worked. She left to walk to a nearby 7-Eleven on 12 Mile Road. She did not return. Kristine was a 5th-grade student at Pattongill Elementary School. The trip was short and the area was familiar. Like Mark, she disappeared during an ordinary movement between places adults believed to be safe. There was no dramatic chase, no known struggle, and no reliable account of the moment she was taken. Days passed, then weeks. Searchers distributed her photograph and followed reports. Winter hardened the ground, and narrowed the hours children were allowed outside. On January 21, 19 days after Kristine vanished, a mail carrier found her body in a snowbank at the end of a dead-end road in Franklin Village. She was still wearing the clothing she had worn when she disappeared. Her body was so frozen that the autopsy could not be completed immediately. Police found no sign of sexual assault. Her cause of death was suffocation. As with the first two victims, she appeared to have been kept alive for a period of time and then left in a place where a resident, driver, or worker would find her. Kristine's 19 missing days were especially important. Holding a child for that long required more than a car and a moment of opportunity. It required a room, food, water, privacy, and a routine that did not cause neighbors, relatives, or co-workers to raise an alarm. The offender may have lived alone, used a second property, controlled a basement or apartment, or had assistance. The evidence does not identify which. It only makes the logistic impossible to ignore. By then, investigators were seeing the similarities. 3 children from nearby communities had disappeared near the Woodward Avenue corridor. Each had been held. Each had been fed or cared for in some fashion. Each had been cleaned. Each body had been left in a public or semi-public location during winter. Mark and Kristine had been suffocated. Jill's shotgun wound remained the major break in the method, but the captivity and presentation tied the cases together more strongly than the weapon separated them. Police departments from several communities began coordinating. Southfield Lieutenant Jerry Simmons brought agencies together as investigators examined the Robinson murder and Mihelich disappearance. A task force was taking shape, but it had not yet reached the size or urgency it would have after the 4th child vanished. On March 16, 1977, Timothy King left his family's home in Birmingham to buy candy at the Hunter Maple Pharmacy. He borrowed 30 cents from his older sister. The store was about 3 blocks away, a trip he had made before. Tim carried his skateboard and asked that the door be left slightly open for him when he returned. A clerk sold him candy at about 8:30 that evening. He walked out through the rear door into the parking lot. When his parents came home around 9, the door was still ajar. Tim was gone. His family searched the streets and called friends. By the next morning, police understood the danger. Headquarters were established near the King home. Officers went door to door, interviewed classmates, checked vehicles, and organized searches across the Detroit area. Parents, who had watched the earlier cases unfold, now knew that another child might be alive somewhere, being held by the same person. Tim's father, Barry King, spoke publicly and pleaded for his return. He described a boy with a basketball game ahead of him, school activities, and a family waiting for him. That appeal carried a private detail that became famous after Tim was found. Barry said that Tim loved Kentucky Fried Chicken. A witness gave police the lead that would dominate public memory. She reported seeing a boy with a skateboard talking to a man in the pharmacy parking lot near a blue AMC Gremlin with a white stripe. Investigators developed a composite drawing of the man: dark hair, prominent sideburns, a narrow or sharply defined face. The sketch and the gremlin were printed together on posters. Police traced registrations and stopped drivers. The small hatchback became visual shorthand for the killer. The problem is that a witness can accurately remember an object without accurately connecting it to a crime. Tim's brother Chris later said that when the family searched the parking lot after Tim disappeared, a blue gremlin was still there. If so, the vehicle may have belonged to someone visiting a nearby apartment or business and may have been nothing more than the background beside a conversation. Later reporting also described a woman who was reluctant to identify the gremlin as hers because she had been meeting someone secretly nearby. That account has circulated for years, though the surviving public record is not complete enough to treat every detail as settled. More important are the police reports themselves. Journalists and family researchers later found references to a dark blue or dark-colored Pontiac Le Mans, Pontiac Tempest, or A similar witness information around several victims. In connection with witness, motors, vehicle. Those descriptions were not as memorable as the Gremlin. They did not appear on the famous poster with the same force. A compact blue car with a white stripe was easy for the public to recognize. A dark Pontiac sedan or coupe was common and less distinctive. No Pontiac description proves that one carried a victim. The reports may refer to different cars seen at different times. Witness memory can drift, model names can be confused, and a vehicle near a child is not automatically an abduction vehicle. Yet the contrast matters because the Gremlin received an extraordinary amount of attention. Every hour spent locating and questioning an owner was an hour not spent on another vehicle, another person, or another route. Nearly a week after Tim disappeared, his body was found in a shallow roadside ditch along Gill Road in Livonia, just south of 8 Mile Road. His skateboard lay nearby. He was still wearing the clothes he had worn to the pharmacy. The autopsy showed that Tim had been suffocated. He had been sexually assaulted with an object. He had been washed and groomed. Shortly before his death, he had eaten Kentucky Fried Chicken, the meal his father had mentioned during the public appeal. That detail has often been described as the killer taunting the family. It may have been. It may also have been an attempt to comfort or control a captive child, or a calculated way to create dependence before death. The evidence cannot reveal the offender's private intention. What it does establish is that someone heard, knew, or coincidentally provided the exact food Tim's father had named while the search was underway. If the meal followed the appeal, the person holding Tim was paying attention to local news. The timing also showed how close the search had come to the final hours. Tim was believed to have been killed only a short time before his body was left. For nearly a week, he had been alive while police, neighbors, and volunteers looked for him. The offender had maintained a hidden space during the most intense phase of the manhunt. After Tim's death, the task force expanded dramatically. Officers from multiple jurisdictions, led in large part by the Michigan State Police, worked from shared headquarters. The investigation received more than 11,000 tips by some official counts and substantially more by later estimates. Every tip created paperwork, interviews, vehicle checks, alibi reviews, and competing priorities. The task force made arrests in unrelated crimes and exposed offenders who had harmed children, but it did not identify who killed Mark, Jill, Kristine, and Tim. The public profile of the suspect reflected the logistics of captivity. Investigators looked for a white man, roughly in his 20s or 30s, who appeared trustworthy to children, knew the area, had flexible time, and controlled a place where a child could be held without attracting attention. The composite carried authority because it came from witness descriptions. Yet there was never proof that the face belonged to the same person who held all 4 children. If more than one offender participated, the sketch might depict a lure, a driver, an associate, or an innocent man seen near Tim. The physical pattern raised the same uncertainty. The boys were sexually assaulted. The girls apparently were not. 3 victims were suffocated. Jill was shot. The captivity, feeding, washing, and visible body placement were consistent. That combination can fit one offender changing methods. It can also fit a shared location or group, in which different people had different roles. Later testing added a small but persistent clue. White animal hairs, believed to be from a dog, were reportedly found on all 4 victims. If the hairs came from the same animal, the children had contact with a shared environment, even if different people abducted them. A dog inside a house, apartment, vehicle, or cottage could transfer hair to clothing without anyone noticing. In 1977, such hairs could be compared visually but not traced with the precision modern laboratories sometimes achieve. By the time new testing became possible, questions about preservation, what could be contamination, and sample size limited what could be concluded. The task force did not search only suburban homes and vehicle registrations. The investigation moved into a hidden world that already existed around Detroit. Organized sexual exploitation of boys, illegal photographs and films, adult men who knew one another, and children who were moved between locations. One branch led north into Lake Michigan, to North Fox Island. The island had an airstrip, cabins, and dock access. Francis Sheldon, a wealthy property owner, had promoted a program known as Brother Paul's Children's Mission. Boys were taken to the island under the appearance of recreation or mentorship. Investigators later uncovered a child pornography operation connected to the property. Sheldon fled the United States and was never prosecuted for the island operation. Another organizer, a teacher commonly identified as Jerry or Gerald Richards, was prosecuted on child pornography charges. The discovery was enormous in its own right. It showed that men with money, aircraft, private property, and respectable public identities had been able to move children into an isolated setting. It also created a powerful theory. Perhaps the Oakland County victims had been taken by someone connected to that network, photographed, passed among offenders, or killed to prevent disclosure. Police investigated that possibility. Detectives interviewed people familiar with the illegal market and asked whether photographs or films of the victims might have been distributed. No verified image of any of the 4 children in captivity has ever been publicly established. Neither Sheldon nor Richards was proven to be the Oakland County Child Killer. No. The island connection remains a network lead, not a solved route from abduction to murder. That distinction is essential. A real child exploitation ring can exist beside an unrelated serial murderer. The fact that 2 horrors occupied the same region and time does not automatically make them one operation. But the overlap cannot be dismissed as internet invention. Task force work did expose the island ring, and several later persons of interest in the murder case had histories involving abuse of boys or associations within similar circles. A second network operated closer to downtown Detroit in and around the Cass Corridor. Vulnerable boys were offered money, food, rides, or attention, and were abused by groups of adult men. Decades later, prosecutions and interviews brought names from that circle back into the Oakland County investigation. Richard Lawson, already serving a life sentence for murder, told a television reporter in 2006 that he knew the identity of the Oakland County Child Killer. He named Bobby Moore, a deceased man associated with the Cass Corridor ring and a bicycle shop. Lawson's statement was direct, but an accusation from a convicted offender is not physical evidence. Moore was never charged in the child killings, and no publicly established DNA, fingerprint, weapon, or vehicle evidence proves Lawson's claim. Theodore Lamborghini, another man tied to abuse in the Cass Corridor, faced numerous sexual assault charges involving boys many years after the murders. Investigators believed members of that network might possess useful knowledge. Lamborghini was never charged with the 4 killings. A civil claim filed on behalf of Mark Stebbins' family alleged his involvement. But a civil allegation is not a criminal finding, and the publicly known evidence did not establish him as Mark's killer. The network theory gained strength because it could explain several otherwise difficult facts. More than one adult could maintain a captive location. One person could approach a child while another provided a car or house. Different methods of killing could reflect different offenders. Shared animal hair could come from a common property. A teenager could be used as a lure. It could also explain why so many men with relevant histories appeared at the edges of the case without any one of them matching every clue. Its weakness is equally clear. A theory that can absorb every suspicious person can become impossible to disprove. Without a verified chain connecting a victim to a specific house, car, photograph, or offender, the network remains a mechanism, not an answer. The case needs more than proof that dangerous men knew one another. It needs proof that one or more of them touched these 4 crimes. In the spring of 1977, while the task force was under intense pressure, a letter arrived that appeared to offer exactly that kind of inside knowledge. Detroit psychiatrist Dr. Bruce Danto had been involved in public discussion of the case. The writer called himself Alan and identified the killer as his roommate, Frank. The letter was filled with spelling and punctuation errors. Alan claimed he had met Frank during the Vietnam War and now lived under his control. He said he accompanied Frank while Frank searched for boys, though he denied being present during the 4 known abductions. Alan described children being kept gagged in a Detroit apartment while Frank went to work. He claimed Frank's violence grew from wartime trauma and resentment toward wealthier families. He portrayed the killer as both affectionate toward children and willing to murder them, a contradiction that resembled the strange care and kill pattern investigators already saw. The letter asked Danto to answer through a coded newspaper message using the phrase, "trees to bloom in 3 weeks." A telephone call followed. Danto arranged to meet Alan at a bar. Alan promised to bring Polaroid photographs that would prove Frank had killed the children, provided he received protection or immunity. Danto went to the meeting. Alan did not. No photographs appeared. No verified Frank was identified. The letter could have come from an accomplice who lost his nerve, a person suffering from delusions, or a hoaxer using details already available in newspapers. Some claims appeared close to the known behavior of the offender. Others may have been drawn directly from public reporting. Without the promised images or a traceable identity, investigators could not convert the letter into evidence. Its most important claim was not the name Frank. It was the idea of 2 men and an apartment, 1 dominant offender, 1 subordinate companion, a working routine, and captives hidden in a populated building. That structure would reappear in later theories, especially when physical evidence began pointing not neatly to one suspects, but toward associates around suspects. Christopher Bush became the most controversial of those suspects. Bush was 26 during the final months of the murders and came from a wealthy, well-connected family. His father was a General Motors executive. Bush had a documented history of sexually abusing boys and had received probation in separate cases where many observers expected prison. Those outcomes later fueled claims that family influence protected him, though a favorable plea deal in an abuse case does not prove protection in a murder investigation. His name entered the child killing inquiry in January 1977 after Gregory Green was arrested on charges involving sexual assaults on boys. Green told police that Bush had killed Mark Stebbins. Investigators questioned Bush. Both men reportedly passed polygraph examinations. Polygraphs are investigative tools, not proof of innocence, and their reliability depends on procedure, interpretation, and the person tested. At the time, however, a past test could strongly affect investigative judgment. Bush admitted abusing a boy who would later become important to the case, James Vincent Gunnels. Gunnels said the abuse occurred at a Bush family cottage on S Lake in northern Michigan. Police also received information placing Bush at or near that cottage with boys shortly before Tim King's body was found. The timing was suspicious, but it did not place Tim there. In November 1978, Bush was found dead in his bedroom from a gunshot wound. The death was officially ruled a suicide. Photographs from the room showed a disturbing drawing of a bound or tormented boy pinned to a wall. Some family members and investigators later believed the child in the drawing resembled Mark Stebbins. Blood-stained ropes or ligatures were also collected. Those objects created the appearance of a near solution. A convicted abuser linked to one later DNA-associated teenager, accused by another offender connected to a remote cottage, dead after the murders stopped, with a drawing resembling a victim and blood on ropes in his room. It is easy to understand why the victims' families focused on him. The evidence did not close around Bush. The drawing was not proven to depict Mark. The blood on the ligatures was not publicly established as belonging to any of the 4 victims. The ligatures were later reported missing from evidence, making future testing impossible. Modern DNA comparisons did not match Bush to the physical profiles investigators had recovered. In 2012, Oakland County prosecutors said there was no physical evidence tying him to the 4 murders and removed him as a suspect. That official position did not satisfy the families. They argued that missing evidence, delayed disclosure, and contradictory records made a clean exclusion difficult to trust. Investigative journalists raised questions about how Bush received probation in his earlier cases, and whether his family's resources affected the way authorities treated him. Prosecutors responded that suspicion, family status, and unsettling objects were not enough to name a murderer when the available DNA pointed elsewhere. Both points can be true at once. Bush may have benefited from unusually lenient treatment as a sexual offender, and he still may not have killed these 4 children. An investigation can fail a community in one way without every larger allegation being correct. The strongest breakaway from Bush came through hair evidence. In 2011, reporting based on police files revealed that a hair recovered from Kristine Mihelich's clothing had a mitochondrial DNA profile consistent with James Vincent Gunnels, or someone sharing his maternal line. Gunnels had been 16 at the time of the murders. He was the same boy Bush had admitted abusing. Mitochondrial DNA is useful when a hair lacks the root tissue needed for a full nuclear profile. It can exclude most people and link a sample to a maternal family line. It generally cannot identify one individual to the exclusion of every maternal relative. A match can be meaningful, especially when the person already has a connection to another figure in the case. But it is not the same as a unique fingerprint. Investigators considered whether Gunnels might have known more than he admitted or might have been used as a lure. A teenager approaching a younger child would attract less suspicion than an adult. Gunnels denied involvement in the murders. He had never been charged with a sexual offense connected to the victims, and no publicly established evidence placed him with Kristine on the day she vanished. There are several innocent or indirect ways a hair can travel. It can transfer through shared clothing, a vehicle seat, a house, an adult offender, or another child. Because Gunnels had been victimized by Bush, his hair could have entered Bush's property or belongings without connecting Gunnels to murder. It could then have hers possibility again. The hair narrows possibilities, but it does not tell the story of how it reached Kristine's blouse. A second hair sequence led to Archibald Edward Sloan, a convicted child molester serving life sentences for later sexual crimes. Investigators examined Sloan's 1966 Pontiac Bonneville. Inside the car they found a human hair with the same mitochondrial profile as hairs associated with Mark Stebbins and Timothy King. The profile did not belong to Sloan. That result was both more powerful and more frustrating than a direct match to Sloan would have been. It connected a vehicle owned by a known offender to trace evidence from the 2 sexually assaulted boys. Yet it pointed past the owner toward an unknown man who had been inside the car, borrowed it, ridden in it, or left hair there through secondary transfer. Sloan reportedly worked at a garage or gas station near 10 Mile and Middle Belt during the period of the murders. That geography placed him near routes relevant to the case. Later reporting said he failed portions of polygraph examinations when questioned about the killings. Again, a polygraph is not courtroom proof. The more durable fact is the hair, the same maternal line profile in the Bonneville, and on evidence connected to Mark and Tim, with Sloan excluded as its source. The Bonneville also reopened the vehicle question. It was not a Gremlin, and it was not necessarily the dark Pontiac described in other reports. But it was a Pontiac owned by a convicted child molester, and an unknown associate's hair connected it to 2 victims. The car did not identify the associate. Publicly available records have not revealed a name that resolves that profile. If the unknown hair donor was the killer, Sloan may have known him. If the hair transferred indirectly, the connection may be weaker. If multiple offenders shared cars and locations, The vehicle could have been part of a broader network without Sloan personally participating in murder. Each possibility fits some of the evidence and fails to explain the rest. In June 2026, that line of inquiry reached what may have been its last living doorway. Sloan, 84, was released from prison on June 9 and placed in hospice care. Detectives questioned him again during the final hours of his life. He died on June 12. In July, WXYZ reported that sources said Sloan had given law enforcement new information to pursue in the Oakland County case. Authorities did not disclose what he said. There was no public claim that he confessed, named the murderer, identified the unknown hair donor, or explained how the hair entered his Bonneville. That restraint matters. A statement from a dying man can be valuable when it contains a fact that was never public and can be independently confirmed. It can also be incomplete, confused, self-protective, or impossible to test after the speaker is gone. Sloan's final interview is therefore a real new development, but it is not a solution unless detectives can connect his words to a person, a place, a vehicle, a surviving sample, or another witness. David Norberg represented another near answer from an earlier phase of the case. Investigators considered him seriously enough that in 1999 a team traveled to Wyoming and exhumed his body. DNA samples were collected and compared. They did not match the relevant evidence. After the expense, publicity, and physical act of reopening a grave, the case moved on. That episode shows how cold case investigation often works. A suspect can appear promising because of geography, behavior, history, or witness information. Only a test can decide whether the theory survives. Norberg's did not. The exhumation did not solve the murders, but it removed one path that otherwise might have remained open forever. Other famous offenders were considered and rejected. John Wayne Gacy's name entered public discussion because of witness descriptions and his travel history. But DNA did not match. The case attracted confessions, rumors, and claims from people who wanted attention or believed they had recognized the composite. Every nationally known predator could be made to fit one piece of the timeline. Few could be placed in Oakland County with the access, vehicle, holding location, and physical evidence required. The buried blue gremlin demonstrated how a symbol can outlive its evidentiary value. In 2013, construction work in Grand Blanc Township uncovered parts of a blue AMC Gremlin with a light stripe. Police examined the remains because ignoring them would have been irresponsible. The find generated headlines and revived the original poster. It did not produce a public link to Tim King or the other victims. By then, the more important car questions were quieter. Why did later police records mention Pontiac models? Was the Gremlin still in the pharmacy lot after Tim vanished? Were witnesses describing the same vehicle or several unrelated ones? Did the offender change cars, borrow vehicles, or work with someone who owned a garage? Could the hair in Sloan's Bonneville identify the man who had access to a different Pontiac seen near a victim? The task force's early structure made those questions harder to reconstruct. 13 communities and multiple agencies generated reports under different systems. Information moved by telephone, paper, radio, and in-person meetings. There were no searchable digital databases linking every address, vehicle, offender, and witness statement. A model name misspelled in one report or filed under one victim might never reach detectives working another abduction. The scale of public response created its own contamination. The composite, gremlin, favorite pattern, body locations, and much of the captivity pattern became widely known. Once those facts entered newspapers and television, later letters and confessions could repeat them without proving inside knowledge. Investigators had to preserve a smaller set of details known only to police, but decades of leaks, litigation, family access, and media reporting gradually reduced that protected core. Families grew increasingly frustrated with what they saw as secrecy and mishandling. Barry King spent decades requesting records and pressing prosecutors for explanations. Kristine's family pursued legal action alleging failures in the investigation. Courts dismissed claims or declined to order broader disclosure. Authorities argued that the homicide files remained open and that releasing sensitive evidence could damage any future prosecution or expose uninvolved people. The conflict became almost another case layered over the murders. Families believed that access might allow independent researchers to identify connections police had missed. Prosecutors believed uncontrolled release could create false accusations and compromise evidence. Then another dispute over what had been withheld. There were real reasons for mistrust. Mark's body had been washed. The ligatures from Bush's room were reported missing. Important hairs were not fully understood until newer technology arrived. Vehicle descriptions appeared inconsistent. Suspects were publicly emphasized, then publicly cleared. The task force disbanded in December 1978 without an arrest, leaving later investigators to inherit thousands of pages and evidence collected under earlier standards. There were also reasons for caution. The names in those files included witnesses, victims of sexual abuse, informants, relatives, and people investigated but never charged. A half-century-old allegation can destroy a living person's reputation, even when the original detective found it baseless. The absence of a public explanation is not proof of a cover-up. Sometimes it reflects a file too weak to charge and too sensitive to release. The strongest modern evidence, therefore, has to be examined without forcing it into a preferred suspect. First, the 4 confirmed victims share a captivity pattern. They were kept alive, fed, cleaned, and returned in clothing. That strongly suggests access to an indoor location and a person capable of maintaining control over time. Second, the offender displayed the bodies rather than hiding them permanently. Mark appeared in a commercial parking area during a narrow daylight window. Jill was left beside an interstate. Kristine was placed at the end of a residential road. Tim was left near a busy boundary road with his skateboard nearby. The sites indicate confidence with driving routes and jurisdiction lines. Third, the boys were sexually assaulted and the girls were not, based on the available examinations. This may indicate one offender whose primary interest was boys, but who also abducted girls for another psychological reason. It may indicate separate offenders using a shared method or location. Jill's shotgun death may reflect resistance, anger, a change in offender, or a deliberate break-in pattern. The evidence does not select among those explanations. Fourth, trace evidence appears to point toward environments and associates rather than a single named man. Animal hair may link all 4 victims to one place or pet. Gunnell's maternal line profile appears on Kristine's clothing, but does not uniquely identify him. An unknown male maternal line profile appears on evidence from Mark and Tim and in Sloane's car, while excluding Sloane. Bush does not match the known physical profiles. Norberg does not match. The science has been better at saying who is not the source than naming who is. Fifth, the social environment contained real networks of men who abused children and shared access. North Fox Island and the Cass Corridor were not theories invented after the fact. Investigations and prosecutions established organized exploitation. Several people around the murder inquiry had direct or indirect ties to those worlds. What remains unproven is the final bridge between network membership and the 4 homicides. The most plausible structure may not be a single cinematic mastermind. It may be an adult offender with 1 or more helpers, willing or coerced, a predator who borrowed cars and properties, or a small circle in which only one person committed the murders while others recognized the victims, the clothing, the dog hair, or the behavior, and remained silent. That is an inference, not an official conclusion. It is supported by the logistics and fragmented evidence, but it cannot replace identification. The opposite possibility remains alive. One offender could have generated every apparent network connection through transfer and coincidence. A man who frequented places used by other abusers could leave hair in a molester's car, know a victimized teenager, and move through the same corridors without acting as part of a formal group. The existence of many predators increases the number of innocent pathways for trace evidence as well as the number of possible accomplices. This is why the blue gremlin matters beyond one mistaken car. It represents the danger of allowing the clearest image to become the whole investigation. The poster gave the public something concrete to search for. It may also have made every other car less visible. The same thing can happen with a suspect. Bushy's room contained the most disturbing collection of objects, so later evidence pointing away from him felt unsatisfying. Sloan owned the car with the matching hair, so it is tempting to make him the killer, even though the hair excluded him. Gunnels matched a maternal line, so it is tempting to turn a teenager who had been abused into an accomplice without proof. A cold case is not solved by choosing the most frightening story. It is solved when separate evidence systems converge on the same person. Timeline, access, vehicle, location, trace evidence, behavior, and corroborated knowledge. In Oakland County, those systems still point in different directions. At the 50th anniversary in 2026, Michigan State Police confirmed that the 4 homicides remained active investigations. The Oakland County Sheriff's Office also began digitizing and re-examining old case material, including the use of modern analytical tools to search for repeated names and relationships that may have been separated across thousands of paper reports. Michigan State Police remained the lead agency, and the new review did not change the legal status. No one had been charged, no official suspect had been named, and the person or people responsible remained unidentified. Modern forensic genealogy offers hope, but the case presents difficult material. Mitochondrial profiles are broad compared with nuclear DNA. Old hairs may lack roots. Samples may be small, mixed, degraded, or contaminated. Evidence consumed in earlier testing cannot be tested again. Missing ligatures cannot be recovered by better science. Any genealogy search would also require a profile strong enough for comparison and legal authorization consistent with current policy. Artificial intelligence can help organize thousands of reports, identify repeated addresses, standardize vehicle names, and compare timelines that human investigators once kept in separate boxes. It cannot decide that 2 similar names are the same person without verification. It cannot restore a destroyed fingerprint or transform rumor into evidence. Technology may reveal a connection, but detectives will still need to prove how that connection entered the case. The most valuable future breakthrough may be ordinary rather than technical. Someone may recognize a cottage, apartment, dog, car, photograph, or phrase. A surviving witness may finally describe who had unexplained access to a child for days. A relative sorting possessions may find photographs or correspondence. An associate may decide that protecting the dead no longer matters more than naming the children. Time cuts both ways. It weakens memory and removes witnesses, but it also dissolves old loyalties. Men who once feared exposure, prosecution, family disgrace, or retaliation may no longer be alive. Their children and grandchildren may find objects without understanding their significance. That is one reason investigators still accept tips, even when the information seems secondhand or incomplete. Any new claim would need to survive the failures that defeated earlier near answers. A photograph would need authentication. A vehicle story would need ownership and route records. A confession would need non-public detail. A DNA association would need a clear explanation for transfer. A suspect would need access to holding place during all 4 disappearances, or a provable relationship with someone who did. The 4 children should not be reduced to evidence modules, but the evidence is now the only path back to them. Mark Stebbins called his mother before beginning a short walk home. 4 days later, if the dog walker's recollection was correct, someone placed him in a parking lot between a morning dog walk and a businessman's trip to a store. Jill Robinson left after a family argument that should have been temporary. She remained near familiar businesses before someone held her through Christmas and left her beside Interstate 75. Kristine Mihelich walked toward a convenience store and disappeared for 19 days. A mail carrier found her at the end of a quiet road, close enough to homes that the person who placed her there had to accept being seen. Timothy King borrowed 30 cents, bought candy, and asked that the door be left open. While his family appealed for him, someone fed him the meal his father had named on television, cleaned him, killed him, and left his skateboard a few yards from his body. The offender's control ended at each disposal site. The control of the story did not. For decades, it moved among police agencies, prosecutors, families, journalists, convicted offenders, anonymous informants, laboratories, courts, and television documentaries. Each held a portion. No one has yet assembled a chain strong enough to name the killer in court. The blue AMC Gremlin remains part of the history because it shaped the search. It may even have been connected in some way that has not been publicly established. But it is no longer safe to treat it as the vehicle that carried Tim, simply because it appeared beside the composite. The more honest image is wider. The Gremlin still in the parking lot, a dark Pontiac mentioned elsewhere in the reports, a Bonneville carrying an unknown man's hair, and thousands of pages that never fully agreed on what passed along those roads. Somewhere inside that wider image may be the missing link. It could be the identity of the hair donor from Sloan's car. It could be something Sloan said before he died, if investigators can prove it against evidence that exists outside his final interview. It could be the true source of the hair on Kristine. It could be a property shared by men from an exploitation network. It could be a witness who saw the right car but used the wrong model name. It could be a person already interviewed who was treated as an associate when he should have been treated as the center. Until evidence proves one of those paths, the case remains what it has been since the task force closed without an arrest. 4 murders, several powerful partial matches, and no legally established killer. Michigan State Police continue to ask anyone with information to come forward. After half a century, the useful detail may not sound dramatic. It may be a dog that shed white hair, a man who borrowed a Pontiac, a teenager brought to a cottage, a basement where children were never allowed to enter, a set of Polaroids that someone hid instead of destroying. Or it may be the reason a blue Gremlin stayed parked while Timothy King vanished.